Yeah, come on in, come on in, come on in. Uh, how you doing out there, everybody? You are in another episode of Colored Commentary Live, coming to you live right here, YouTube's and the Facebooks. And if you want to hear the show that is not live, you will go to all your podcast places, right? Spotify, uh, Apple, you know what I mean? My Heart Radio, whatever it is, you can find us. Lots of episodes out there today. We got another episode. I am your host, Marcus Lloyd, and with me, as always, is Antoine Malone. What's happening, Antoine?
What's up? What's up, everybody? Happy New Year, 2022, the first color commentary of 2022. We here. We have made it through a turbulent 2020 and 2021. And
I mean, mostly
forward. Well, we
here.
We're limping in, but we here. So and so that's what's up. So if you are here, say what's up, say hello in the comment section. This is a conversation between Marcus and I and you.
Right.
And we want you guys to be part of the conversation as usual on the live. So that is what makes the lives unique, is that you guys get to be a part of the convo. So jump in the comment section and do your thing.
Hey, that's the way to get it going. You know what I'm saying? Like, it is a new year, a whole new, I'm not going to say it's a new color commentary, but I feel like we've got some energy moving into this new year because there's so many things to do, right? I think some people, when they think about this conversation, it's kind of one of those things like they can kind of take it or leave it. But for us, we're always in the conversation because it's always something that we believe the church needs to be engaged in and thinking about. I've said many times, when you're looking at the mission of God and what God is trying to accomplish in the midst of the scriptures, you will see a very key element of it is to bring all tongues, tribes, nations, and people groups together in the throne room of God. And so because of that, we have to start thinking about these relationships between cultures and ethnicities, and in our context, races, as the church. We have to think biblically about that. We have to think theologically about that, and we have to think missionally about that. And so when we have these divisions and these things that we see in the midst of our environments that come across ethnic lines, cultural lines, man, that is a place for the church to enter in and participate. Don't you think so, Antoine?
Absolutely. And if you and if for no other reason, we should be always ready to figure out, how to love each other the best possible way. And I think sometimes we love each other and we think it's enough. Like that's enough.
I've done enough. I've kind of met my quota. Right.
Yeah. Like I loved you, and like that's plenty. I don't need to do much else.
How many times should I love somebody?
That's right. But the reality is, if we love like Jesus says to, then we're always looking to figure out how we can love more, how we can love better, right? Yeah. And we're always trying to look to broaden the borders of our love, right? And so where there's opportunity for that is in a lot of the racial dynamics and conversations, and so. If you want to express worth and value and love for people in the Imago Dei and people, it's a great way to be a part of that. What's up, D'Angelo and Brian? I see y'all in the house.
What's happening,
Brian giving us some flack because we was a little bit late.
We are late, yes.
Just a little bit. We was just we had to work out a little kinks, but we here.
But I appreciate that he wanted us to be in here. You know what I mean? Right when the button plays. We do. We have. Coming up in a couple of weeks, one of the things we do is called cultural intelligence training. And when I do that training, a lot of times I'm talking about different values and beliefs when you're talking about culture that distinguish some cultures between one another. And I always love having the conversation because what you'll do is you'll take an assessment and you'll find out like your own cultural sort of IQ, but I'll also show it on a scale, right? And kind of show you where certain cultural groups kind of land on the scale. And so you think about even what we're having this conversation where you have sort of Anglo thoughts about time and African thought about time, and those are two different. One is time is if you've ever been to Africa or been with some African Americans, time sometimes maneuvers just a little bit. It's not always right at 11:30. Sometimes it's 11:30, 11:32.
It's Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. He's like, a wizard always arrives when he's supposed to.
When he's supposed to arrive, right? It's just
he's always on time. Is what Gandalf was at. That's the line we're going with.
That's it. It's called time orientation. And so I know when I'm messing with multicultural groups, there are those from my Anglo brothers and sisters who are 11:30 at the time, 11:29. They like, why haven't we started yet? And then if you go to wait till about 11:40, you'll be getting some other people of color coming in to the room, right? So here we are in there. So I see
he knew you was gonna say that. He said so. Black people are always late.
I didn't say it quite like that.
But
I didn't say it like that.
We all know that if we go to a wedding,
and
there's some brothers in charge and sisters in charge.
Yeah,
we just might be sitting there for a little bit. No, not to say that all maybe that's just a wedding thing, but that's the first thing that came to my mind.
Look, it doesn't have to be a pejorative. It doesn't mean. See, we say late is a bad thing. Sometimes late is just maybe that's on time for people, right? You know what I mean? Maybe that is a
give you time to come in and relax a little bit.
You know what I mean? Like there are people who always are like, hey, if I left on time, I would have ended up in a wreck. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes if you do things late, you miss out on things. You know what I mean? So
yeah. Or you just get in. Listen, it's a courtesy. Get there and relax.
There you
go. A little bit. Get warmed up. We'll start, but we want to make sure that everybody's nice and comfortable. Shoes are kicked off and all before we're ready to go.
Yeah. Hey, look, and that's it. This is a learning we are all doing together. How to engage and work well with one another. And it's not just about that. I know sometimes when we get into the race and the race reconciliation conversation, many times people will stop at, we're just trying to create these venues where we can be in relationships with one another and how to engage. But there's more to it, right? There is more to the conversation. There's actually doing something about really attacking the reasons why we have to talk about reconciliation in the first place, which is the things that were engaged in, done historically, and even the things that are done now between people all over the world, in which you have to actually engage that and change the behavior of how people engage. And then also look to what can we do to make sure those who have been treated a certain way, that amends are made, right? We do this in a lot of other ways. And so as we think through this a bit going into today, I want to know that I want to talk a little bit today, Antoine, about what we always tend to talk about, not just we, but I think a lot of people in this conversation are talking about in January, and that is the birthday of whom, Antoine?
Martin Luther the King.
Martin Luther the King. That's right. That's right. That's right. Martin Luther the King. We're talking about that.
Wait. The people, if you're in the comment section, you heard me say hit you in the chest with Martin Luther King. You got to drop in what that reference is, and then you can go to the next level of our friendship. If you don't have that, then you have to stay at the level that you are. We cool, but.
Actually, hold up. No, that's exactly right. If you know where that's coming in, then throw it into the chat there, and we can find out if you rock it all the way with us. But we are talking about Martin Luther the King, but we're talking about it in a different kind of way maybe than we have before, right? The name that I think we went with for this particular episode is Dr. Martin Luther King, American Dream or Marxist Nightmare. Dun, 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 right? Like, is that I struggle with that. You know what I mean? I think that is, the question sometimes people are wrestling with right now about the conversation as a whole. And I think what we're trying to understand here today is trying to understand Dr. King, where he was in his fullness of thought. As opposed to just different markers that can be pulled out and used as kind of the whole. I think that's fair, Antoine. Like if we were looking at a person's life,
we can start with the, like, even before we get into the sort of progression, like we can start with why is Martin Luther King and Marxism
in the same sentence?
Being even associated to each other. And the reality is that with the current climate, Martin Luther King has been a predominantly universally received icon, if you will, of the civil rights era, of someone who pursued the right things where it pertained to civil life, and made a big difference. But as the country has grown more and more divided, or maybe more interested, let's say it neutrally, interested in the conversations around race, I think Dr. King people have started to deconstruct, if you will, Dr. King.
Ooh, he said
and get in there and they say, okay, so what did he actually believe and want? And what people are finding is that he was critical in some places of capitalism, and that he was sympathetic to the way Karl Marx laid out the problem of society where it pertained to wealth. And that caused people to associate Dr. King with Marxism and socialism. And therefore, quietly, I think we might begin to hear it a little bit more, quietly, people are starting to believe that maybe Dr. King isn't as big a hero as we at first thought.
Yeah, which is all right. I want to say it's disappointing, but at the same time, like, there's a part of me that is anti-hero worship anyway. You know what I mean? I don't think anybody can really stand under the weight of the kind of heroism that I think we put upon them, particularly in some of the most like profound parts of our historical movements. I just think that we're always dealing with human beings, right? We could say, like, I think we're always like, it's the same when we have had the discussion around Abraham Lincoln. Like, you can't just kind of take the Emancipation Proclamation in and of itself and just go, okay, this is the fullness of it. Like, he's a human being that's got all these different types of things that go along with him, just like you and I. And so dealing with Dr. King, you got to do the same. But I think what's interesting more than anything is the way in which he has been kind of put on this hero icon, but the things that he's been put on this icon or this pedestal for are for things that would be, if I can say it like this, things that would be comfortable for the majority environment to sort of digest from the civil rights movement. You said that in some ways, Dr. King, he came onto the scene having studied a lot of different things that led to the communications that he made later on in his career, if you will. He is a dude who went to college. He went to seminary. He studied a lot of Marxist communist things so that he can understand like what was going on in the world, which I love about that. I think he would say, again, I don't agree with a lot of the solutions, but I felt like I needed to understand it because of the prevalence of poverty and things in the world, right? But I think we put him on there and we raised him up at his birthday, and we only remember the "I Have a Dream" speech. And particularly in the "I Have a Dream" speech, we get this, don't judge people by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And that particular line has so much in it that I think people are trying to hold on to. You've got meritocracy in there. Like, hey, we gotta let the best throw the best in the pool and see who comes out. So it's that content of the character. There's a colorblind philosophy that kind of came up after the civil rights movement that's coming in there, right? We're not judging people by the content of their skin, so we're not going to talk about the color of their skin, so we're not going to talk about that, not going to make that a thing. Race does not exist. I think in this desire to want to be in the post-racial society, or maybe try to continue the belief that we are in one, Dr. King has been used for that, as opposed to where I think he also, if I could say it like that, also fits in. He also fits into sort of this sort of revolutionary mentality that people are bringing in, that some would connect to Marxism and communism. I mean, is that fair to say? Is that he's kind of moved into that space?
Yep, he had. Well, he was always clear to communicate that he was anti-communist, so and he wrote many papers on that and gave many speeches on that. I think one of the quotes, I have it here, one of the quotes that we have from him is that it says here that although sympathetic to communism's core, hold on. It says here, as King rose to prominence, he frequently had to defend himself against allegations of being a communist, though his view was that, and this is the quote, communism and Christianity are fundamentally incompatible. And so, obviously, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King,
Reverend Doctor,
and that's in 1952. And his public life from 1952 to 1962 or 3, there's this whole accusation against Dr. King about communism, probably because the Black Panther movement and many of the other movements in the civil rights conversation were embracing some of the communist ideas openly, and they would have said, yeah, we do want socialism and communism. And it was easier for that group just to lump all of the civil rights conversation together, and therefore attach Dr. King to the thoughts of anyone who was speaking against the racial status quo. Despite the fact that for an entire decade, Dr. King would repeatedly speak against it. Now, here's the thing. The thing is, Dr. King, as a problem solver, is trying to understand the problem well. And in that, what he found some sympathetic place for the way that Karl Marx frames the issues in society with regard to what happens with money and so forth and so on. And so his writings would, in a sense, agree with the layout of the problem that socialism or communism or Karl Marx initially pursues, but disagrees entirely with the overall ideology of communism and socialism. And of course, is not interested in the end result, the way socialism lays it out. But the conversation was him working through all that. Add to that he was a little anti. Should I say anti?
Yeah.
That he was critical of capitalism. He wasn't in love with capitalism. So Brian in the comment section saying, hey, he feels like Black people are going to agree with Martin Luther King regardless. I disagree with that, but it's that same sentiment that many people think that white America will just side with capitalism regardless. Yeah. And in the same way that you might feel, Brian, that Black people can't take critique of Martin Luther King, some white people can't take critique of capitalism. And Dr. King offers some critique, especially from the place where he was looking at it. Yeah.
And I would say not only a critique of capitalism, a critique of socialism, a critique of communism, a critique of Marxism, right? I think that's what was so interesting, is that he had a critique for all of that. Now, he would call himself a democratic socialist, right? He was really big on this idea of community, the beloved community, which is kind of a local, and then the great world house, which is really looking at the entire world, and this idea that we are all living in the same house, living in different rooms. How do we sustain life together under the same roof of the planet? And so he would call himself that. And I would say that there's lots of Black Americans, Black Christian Americans, who do not agree with ultimately what Dr. King is talking about in a democratic socialism. And many who would say that it would never work, and may be correct in that sense. But the idea is that there was this discussion, and you said it, Antoine, like the commentary that he would have would immediately lump him into the group where you're a communist, you're a Marxist, right? It was this way of silencing people, right? And silencing the opportunity to hear have divergent conversation, or even more, sort of robust conversation on particular issues, especially if you didn't know, if you weren't really knowledgeable about the issues, and you didn't feel like getting knowledgeable about the issues. It was much easier to just chalk it up as, oh no, Dr. King, you're a communist and I don't want to hear. Or if you're a person who you hear what he has to say and it challenges you in such a way that you may have to lose or gain or share or whatever those things are that may go with that, Again, it's easier just to lump them with the enemy, lump them with the devil, than to hear all the nuance in the midst of the conversation. And what I would say is so much of what we see in Dr. King's time, I think we're seeing even now when we have these conversations where people, even like myself, occasionally, if I would say certain things that align with concepts that would eventually maybe align with what Marx would say, or what you'd hear in communism or socialism, that I eventually, you're just over in this camp. And I think that that's really a struggle. And I think for all of us, I think we should be in a point of understanding that we all should desire to want to grow in our knowledge and our understanding of all these topics, because the benefit of that is, in many ways, what Dr. King was working for, and really a lot of, and if I could dare say, African American leaders during the civil rights movement, they were all working to actually create an actual democracy, an actual version, like working version of the original ideal of America in all of its, quote unquote glory. All the things that the quote unquote forefathers articulated constitutionally, which did not get actually practiced constitutionally. The Black community and really Black leaders in the civil rights movement were trying to actually create as a practical and practicing democracy. So there are many who would say democracy was not fully created until the 1960s, once the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Fair Housing Acts of the 1960s came through. They would say we didn't even have a democracy until then, because not all people had equal access to the protection under the law and so on and so forth. So with that being in mind, America potentially is only about 50, 55, 56 years old, if you're thinking about it as what it is. So all that to say, that's what, if you really read robustly and read a larger cross section of what Dr. King says, I think you will see some of that desire to see America become actually what it meant to be. In fact, the I Have a Dream speech, that's what he starts off with. He said, he's talking about, we're here to cash a check, right? Like that we would all actually get to be part of this America that was created at the beginning. So, and he would say it's been 100 years and the Negro's still not free from the Emancipation Proclamation. It's time to make this thing a real thing. So I'm interested in his journey, though. You know what I mean? Because
and it bleeds in, like the journey, because like we were talking about just a minute ago, we've got that binary way of thinking, which is to say either you're all with me or you're completely against me, right? Which is what leads to taking something like Dr. King and lumping him with anyone who disagrees with you, and the most extreme versions of that disagreement, lumping everybody with that extreme interpretation, because you only have a binary one or the other way of thinking about things, as opposed to a nuanced spectrumed way of thinking about things, which affects our ability to do what we're talking about, which is this concept of the journey that Dr. King is on, or that any of us are on, right? Where we would be working through a problem, and we may hold a conviction at one level, and then grow out of that conviction and adjust ourselves later, because we're growing in the spectrum, and it's not one or the other, but there's a whole process of coming into what it is, the sort of most optimum ideal that we're trying to get into. And one of the things that bugs me about the conversation around race probably is going to happen to you and me too, Marcus. Okay. Somebody's going to come and use our words against us at some point. Because
what do you mean probably going to happen?
Probably, right?
It's already been happening.
They're going to use our words against us because we're public and we're speaking out about our convictions, but we haven't stopped growing. Because we're public and speaking and have grown to a place where we can articulate some ideas that we're working through doesn't mean that we're done baking. And it turns out that sometimes as you get older or as you continue the journey, you make adjustments to your thought patterns, and you learn that something maybe that you said earlier needed more clarification, or was misspoken, or was all out incorrect. And I think that happened maybe to Dr. King as well. I can't imagine that if we were to sit here with Dr. King today, that he would not look back at some of his old work and say, maybe I was off here. 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road of his work, he doesn't look at year 1, year 2, and maybe say, man, I should have said this better, or that was a bad analogy, or this concept was completely wrong. And I think that we just don't, it seems that we, in the body of Christ now, when I say we, I'm not even talking about America, I'm talking about Christians. We have lost our ability to extend grace to people for the journey, right? We expect them to be right all the time, or wrong and all wrong all the time. And boy, if we can discredit someone by taking something they said a long time ago and bringing it up, we are happy. We seem all too happy to do that. And that is destroying our ability to grow together and to come across really good solutions to problems, because most of the things are processed. I mean, if we did it that way, Marcus, then America is a terrible country, because we can step back into America and we can see something that America now doesn't believe in, that it executed.
Yeah.
And if we were working with this binary way of thinking, then either America was always good or it was never good. Right. And if we find anything wrong, then it was wrong. Then it was bad. And that's not the way. That's not a healthy way to look at our country. That's not a healthy way to look at individuals. And it's not a healthy way to engage very serious and nuanced, complicated issues and problems associated with our social context.
Yeah, we don't do that. We don't do that anywhere else in life. I mean,
nowhere.
Like particular relationships.
Only when we're arguing do we do that.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? Like I just got the privilege of celebrating, 20 years of marriage. You know what I mean, to my wife, and I remember she was like throwing up. She's been throwing up pictures of when we were, just pups, just the babes. You know what I mean? Just looking at the pictures and. The ideas and the thoughts that we had as
you saw a hairstyle that you regretted, probably. That's what happened. You're like,
There is one. There is, and you know me, I changed my hair so much that there's just gonna be a few that you just like. I don't know why I did that. But again, like I think there's just ways in which we were thinking about life, the way we thought about marriage, the way we thought about roles and what we're supposed to be doing when we were 22. That when we're now at where we are now, 20 years later, like it's just different, and we accept that. And it's no good to kind of go back in time and go, well, you said this, and so that's what you still think. It's like, I don't think that anymore. That was 22 years ago. What are you talking about? And I think that's just the natural progression of what we do in life, period.
Yeah. I think I think about parenting, and when you think about parenting, you especially if you have multiple children, you probably made a lot of mistakes with that first child, learn some things, but the mistakes are made, and the child doesn't understand until they become a parent, and they got to make some decisions, and then they start making these mistakes, and then they learn, you know what, I need to give my parents a little more grace, because nobody's ready immediately, And
isn't that? I mean, I love that you said that. Like once you start doing it, the grace comes. Right. I think in this conversation, a couple of things you could think about is, I think so many people are sort of tangentially engaged in the conversation, right? They see a podcast, they'll jump in, or they'll get on a conversation, they'll jump in, or they'll, go do some sort of, unity, something, they'll jump in. But this kind of thing has long-term engagement that's needed. And as you get in deeper, you find you have to adjust, because you're running into more diverse audiences, right? I mean, you could go back, and one of the things that's happening even now in the conversation, when it goes back to the civil rights movement, it goes back to all those leaders, is that it was a predominantly male-dominated movement, and that it didn't create a lot of space for ladies to be a part of the movement. And so now there's a lot of talk about, not a lot, but there is definitely an understanding like, hey, as we go into this new sort of movement that they're in, we don't need to do it like that. we need more female involvement in the midst of it, right? And so there's a lot of talk about that. Some are going, hey, I get it, I understand what was going on back then, that's whatever. And some are just discrediting all the civil rights leaders because women were not engaged in the conversation. And again, it's a process. Like, we're all trying to get through this. And for Christians particularly, we above anybody should know that this is a process. It's called sanctification, right? And we should know that, man, like, when we came to God and decided to follow after Jesus, like, we were one way. And as we've gotten older, we go, man, I was still making a lot of mistakes after I did that, right? Even in the midst of all of the mistakes God knew that we were going to make, Jesus still died on the cross for us. He didn't die on the cross because of what he thought we were going to be. He died for who we were, and he knew we would be, which would be imperfect. And so that's where, at least for Threaded, when we talk about this stuff, we want to get into these conversations and we want to provide grace for the journey. Now, that's not easy.
Right. And we're not good at that. Like, we should, like what you said, we should be, but it's kind of a marker because we are very intolerant, even of each other's. Sometimes, let me say, I've seen a lot of, more recently, intolerance for just the difference in some theological views. We can't worship together because we don't agree
this way,
because you baptize this way, that, or the worship looks this way or that way, or what have you. And again, we always come back. I always come back to Romans 14, where he seems to be promoting this grace for the process. He's saying, if you want to have unity, if you want to be together, right, you're going to have to understand that not everybody is growing at the same pace, and their journeys are not all starting at the same time. Right. That means that there are going to be very strong convictions that where people believe they're following God, but there's disagreement around those convictions. And what Paul is saying in Romans 14 is like, you've got to learn how to live with that and allow that to grow, allow that growth to happen with each other, because God's going to honor their convictions. And if we can't do that with the very core of who we are as believers in our sanctification journey, then we bring in these very high stake conversations around civil discourse, race and money and politics, then we're going to be far less ready and equipped to be tolerant of other people's process of way of growing and thinking. Especially when you start thinking about generationally, even when you talk about young adults versus older adults and so forth and so on. And so the church should be a place where, man, we're exemplifying what this looks like. And it's not always true. And Dr. King is going to be potentially one of those. Is it a scapegoat? One of those targets where you find something you disagree with, something that he's struggling through. Some of his theology, some people have had issues with, where he had a thought early and then he changes that thought later. But because he had that thought early and it's written in something, then all of a sudden Dr. King is that, and he can never not be that. He's that, and I think that's not gracious at all.
And I hope, and it will be done to me, I'm sure, as well. It has been done to me, and it will continue to be. And I think when you get onto that public forum, like where Dr. King was, you just recognize that that's what's going to happen. Is you're going to have to learn in public. And so I think it's more of like, as we watch people engage this, not just in public, but just in our own personal relationships, as we watch people engage this conversation, it's leaving room to understand that what they think in this moment may not be what they will think in the future. And honestly, if there is loving and sort of intentional engagement by others who may have a different thought in that relationship, and in committing to more conversation and engagement in that relationship, you may find that those folks who are leaning one way may start to lean another way. Maybe even lean towards your thoughts and actions and your ideas, particularly if they are biblical and true. That helps. And I think that, I think we got to rely a lot on, the Spirit of God to move in people's lives. We see that, and we say that in the midst of evangelism, if you will, but there's something in the midst of when we're having these conversations, anything outside of that the Holy Spirit can't actually move in that.
Yeah.
And you can't separate the sacred from the secular. Right. At least I know we kind of have this idea of that's kind of what we've been taught to do is this thing happens over here, this thing happens over here. But the Spirit of God is the God of all nations, is the God of all. The Holy Spirit is will move in any way that it wants to through anyone. And so this sort of engagement in that sense is what we have to remember, and just trust that God's going to engage both the quote unquote secular and the sacred in this space. And I think Dr. King is an interesting, sort of person to put up front here, because he is someone who was this public theologian. So he was bringing the gospel and the ideas of who God was into the public sphere and trying to do it in such a way that he could be heard. And he's probably one of the most uh, sort of universally world known people out there, who is a Christian, who was listened to not just in the Christian space but also in other realms, right? In the political
Right.
realm, in academia. I mean, he got a Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, it's really interesting. So he's a really good person to kind of look at, and his
Yeah.
ideas grew. And I don't know if I don't know if even that's the right way to say it, but I'm not
Evolved, right?
evolved.
Or
I
they
don't want to say they changed
well,
necessarily. Maybe they
I think
did.
evolution is good because
Okay.
evolution, when something evolves, it's predominantly the same,
Uh-huh.
but there's little nuances. There's little things that change. Again, Dr. King was a practitioner trying to solve a real problem, and and for any one of us, look, you can't fix your sink without, well, let's say maybe that's more complicated, but you can't do a rudimentary fixing of a problem around your house without potentially making a mistake in the process. Not many. If you go, anyone who goes to Home Depot, you got to go to Home Depot like 2 or 3 times, because more than likely you forgot something, you
That's right.
broke something
Been there.
broke something that wasn't broken
Been
before.
there.
Anyone who's a practitioner who's trying to solve problems likely is going to make mistakes, or, make mistakes, do things that they wouldn't want to, that they have to fix or they have to work
All
out
right.
later or what have you. And so it's not that different from in the social realm, or the Christian realm for that matter. And I think we have a tolerance for our own growth in this sense, but we lose a tolerance for others.
Well, and I think if you follow Dr. King's life, you're going to see that it was his intentional engagement in different spaces that kind of brought on growth. And I think that's a learning for us too as we're going. So, I mean, if you kind of, look at Dr. King, I'm going to say this, and please don't, I mean, you can respond if you want to. I'm not trying to put them in the same space. I'm just giving you some sort of
I already know what you're
analogy.
gonna do. Do
Yeah.
you want to do this?
Yes.
Is this about to be another trip
No,
to Home
no,
Depot?
no, just,
And we're gonna have to
I
fix
just,
this right now. Is what I'm about to say.
perhaps you may have to fix this, but I'm just saying we kind of get Dr. King at a certain point in his life, like he pops on the scene. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, it was just like he wasn't existing, and then all of a sudden, he was everywhere. Which kind of happened to Jesus. There was this whole section of life that you don't know, but there's something that led up to these points that when Dr. King started, talking about things, there was all this work that had been done to get him to that point. So you have the early years of Dr. King. He was the son of a preacher. His grandfather was a preacher. His wife's father was a preacher. He was a reverend preacher, right? Again, going to very kind of almost liberal types of seminaries and colleges and whatnot, but he was destined to he wanted to be a preacher and engage people in the conversation. And we find him sort of being thrust into action in the Montgomery bus boycott. And sort of, and as that was coming up, that was kind of localized. So he was kind of stayed in the South, dealt in Montgomery, had a church in Atlanta, went to Birmingham. We know the march at Selma, right? So he had a lot of stuff that was going. That was kind of the Southern sector dealing with racism that was going on, and he was bringing all of his theology and all of his engagements to that particular medium of the South. And then we see Dr. King continue to sort of evolve as he makes his way north and starts to look at the sort of the ghettos of the North, and saw that that the problem of segregation was much more sort of almost devious in the North than it was in the South. It was just a different way of looking at it. it was almost as if the North had kind of been stalled in a spot and the South was just needing to catch up to the North, and where the North was not great. But then for Dr. King, it kept expanding for him. It went from the South, it went to the North, and it went to the world. And so you see, even as we get into the I Have a Dream speech, which comes late kind of in his maturation, if you will, that particular speech is a difficult one to even judge him on, because it was actually, most of it was actually pre-screened by those who were putting on the actual march, which were predominantly white folks. And there were folks who couldn't actually speak, who weren't allowed to speak, like a James Baldwin, because they didn't like what his speech was, and so they didn't let him do it, right? But most of that speech was something that was kind of pre-screened by others. But if you watch his move and his discussions, particularly as he gets in the 60s, like he's talking about Vietnam. And this cat who had a kind of relationship with Lyndon Baines Johnson, particularly in the areas of civil rights and bringing the civil rights, legislation up in front, he starts to berate him because of the war in Vietnam and berate the ways in which the country was engaging. And that's when I think he started to lose a lot of his fanfare and love from the broader American audience, because he was talking about the military and sort of the why have. I mean, he was really wrestling with this whole why have a military, right? Wrestling with why are we liberating over in Vietnam but not liberating here? He's got some great quotes. There's a book, or there's a speech that he gave called "A Time to Break the Silence" that he gave. I think it was 1967. It was exactly a year before he was assassinated. And he's calling on this idea of a brotherhood of man. Remember when I said he had this world, the global world that he was looking towards, right? The world house. And he talks about the brotherhood of man. He says, this is a calling that takes me beyond national allegiances. But even if it were not present, I would yet have to live with the meaning of my commitment to the ministry of Jesus Christ. To me, the relationship of this ministry to the making of peace is so obvious that I sometimes marvel at those who ask me why I'm speaking against the war. Could it be that they do not know that the good news was meant for all men, for communists and capitalists, for the children of ours, for their children and for ours, for black and for white, for revolutionary and conservative? Have they forgotten that my ministry is in obedience to the one who loved his enemies so fully that he died for them? What then can I say to the Viet Cong, or to Castro, or to Mao as a faithful minister of this one? Can I threaten them with death, or must I not share with them my life? Wow. That's a tough one to have at that particular time, and even now.
That's a quote. Yeah. Well, we already know, and we got a special guest that we're going to bring in here in just a minute. But okay, cool. we got to know that Dr. King would have been or would have been not as well received as he is, as his legend is today. If he was sitting here on this podcast with us, the people mad at us would be mad at him.
Right.
And because of what we're saying. But Marcus, tell us, we're going to take a quick little break here because we want to share something with you guys about something that's coming up. Paula, I see you in the chat.
Yeah, we'll get to that, Paula, in just a second.
And so, yeah, we'll come back and talk a little bit about what you were saying there. But go ahead, Marcus, tell us a little bit about.
Look, as an organization, Threaded has always been about trying to partner with those who are doing the work. We know that we can't do everything here, so we want to partner with a lot of folks who are out there who are doing the work. And so as we get started on this new year, we're partnering with Dallas Dinner Table and with my good friend Dion Kirby. How are you doing, Miss Dion? Good to see you in the house. Welcome from Dallas Dinner Table. I know you were running and gunning. We've got your event coming up here, a virtual event that anybody, anywhere, in any part of the country can get in on, happening on Dr. King's birthday, January 17th. Dion, tell us a little bit about what the event is and why people should be engaged in this.
You know, this I'm happy to be joining with you all. So thank you for having me. discuss this and join in this discussion. I see y'all are cool and comfortable and getting real deep. So I'm going to try to get
You
up
know
there
how we
and
do
in
it,
there all
Dion.
at
You
the
know
same
how
time.
it goes.
Indeed, indeed. So, it's an intentional conversation. How many times do we decide we need to have this conversation? How many times do we decide to be uncomfortable
Mm,
and also engage in something that's not a debate, not an
yeah,
argument? And then how often do we just listen?
yeah,
Just listen to people and that's the purpose. We come to the conversation with that in mind. So that's the opportunity that we have. So you said it, January 17th, it will be 6:30 to 8:30 p.m.
Central Standard
on,
Time.
that's right. Thank you. Yes, on MLK Day. And that's what we get a chance to do, to listen to some people that we haven't met before, to see some people we haven't met. And there were blurbs that went out and people were asking, who's on the panel? Like, what's happening? It's like, no, you're on the panel.
You on the panel.
You're on the panel. You are our specially invited guest. And we want to hear from you. And we want people to have an opportunity to hear someone else's perspective.
Yeah, and what I love is, as we're talking today, we're talking about this idea that people can journey. They can start one place and they can move to the next. And for many, just sitting down at the table in a quote, I'm not even going to put this in quotes because it is a very safe conversational space, may be the beginning of the journey for them. And it's an important step along the way. I know that there's a lot of folks, again, I said it earlier, that get frustrated by it. Let's just stop. Why we keep coming together and talking about things? We need to be doing action. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm about that. You know what I mean? I'm like, but for some people, they're not ready to jump into action, right? Because if they jump in, they come with the wrong motivation and they just gonna mess the whole thing up anyway. Right. For some people, they're just scared to do it. Right. It's just a big lump. They don't know what to do. They've never been around people who are different, all that kind of stuff. And so you got to start in different ways. We've been segregated for a long time and separated intentionally. So this is a chance that people get to come in and have it. So what's needed, and I've been here before, Dion, like is it just for those who is this their first time, or would you recommend people who've been in the conversation a little bit to get in on this as well?
I love for people to get in on this who've had this conversation before. You all were talking before you had me come in about the need for the redo, and the need to adjust some things. You're not going to get everything right the first time. And this is not about right, but this is about recognizing, as you said, Marcus, we're on this continuum. We have a journey. Yeah. So even if I participated 12 months ago, I would hope some things are different in my mind and my mindset and what my focus is than 12 months ago. So, we have monthly meetings for whatever the reason is, right? I still have some new information that I didn't have last month.
Yeah.
So it is about self-directed progress, though. So it's an opportunity for you to confront yourself in a way that you haven't before. Because even if you have confronted yourself, you didn't do that with 8 other people or 9 other people. Yeah. And so their approaches and their perspectives, they matter. They mean something. And so that's what it's about, being on this journey together. You also said, Marcus, about how we've been segregated, and that was intentional. So the real is that we have to be intentional about connecting with people who aren't like us. Because I can look to my school experiences and how I have friends that resulted from that. I just sent out my birthday invites. I know what that group looks like. It's a multicultural group. But there's a reason. There's a reason why it's multicultural, because I was in a school where I became friends with people who didn't look like me. Yeah. And that's not everybody's experience. So
I
time.
love that. I love the you set it up almost like your yearly check-in. You know what I'm saying? Like you know what I mean? Like, I think I'm learning, I think I'm growing, but how do you know?
Yes.
And for many of us too, again, COVID's done a lot of damage to us in the midst of community, because we have found ourselves sort of isolated in our own echo chambers, where we're just hearing the same thing that we say repeated back to us by others, whether it's on social media or in our home, the people will allow to be in our presence that may potentially have COVID or not. But in the sense of, when you get around a table like this, where people are intentionally coming, you get to evaluate yourself with other people who may not think the way you think. You hear their stories. And what I think is interesting about the Dallas dinner table situation is that you have some parameters in the midst of the conversation that ensure that everybody gets to kind of get their thought out without having to be sort of berated by that thought. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely fair. That's absolutely what it is. And you mentioned that some people, where this might be their first time, sometimes they're intimidated by that, and we're also intentional about people just coming, the agenda, we will let you know what you need to know. But sometimes we don't need all the information because you don't need to prepare in the typical ways you might for a certain type of conversation.
That's fair.
Yeah.
All of that is on purpose.
Yeah, I love that. I think for me, just the grace for the idea that today is somebody's first day of talking about this, and every day is a new first day for somebody.
Yep.
And they're going to bring something new to the table, and that adds value to my growth.
Yep.
But also, I have a great opportunity to extend this amazing amount of grace to someone who's just walking into something brand new, and assuring them that this is a safe place to walk, this journey on, and you can do it in the context and the company of these people, and to be able to start that journey and to do those things and understand that, Dallas Dinner Table sounds like a great place to jump in, to learn something new and be gracious to others around us as we have these conversations around really difficult and nuanced things.
Yeah.
And Lord knows we can use some practice and being gracious. I don't think we have enough. That's all good. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. We definitely need the practice. And I love what you said. Like we were segregated, separated, and it was intentional. So to make connection, you have to be intentional. This is an opportunity for, again, those who are on their first, or even if they've been in it for a minute, because I did it last year. Like I've been in this for a minute. I did it last year. It was great to be able to sit down and hear other perspectives and see others taking their first step. But you have to be intentional about it. And what I love is part of the partnering together that we're doing is there's a great opportunity for people to start in Dallas Dinner Table. And then we've got these other next steps from a threaded standpoint, next steps that people can walk down. There are folks who are going to come into this conversation. This may be the first time that they sit at a table, have a conversation like this with people who look different than them. They may want to now go a little deeper in with people who do look like them. And we create this homogenous environment, particularly for my white brothers and sisters as they're walking in, that we call Let's Talk About Race. It's another partnership that we have with another org that has created a great curriculum and class to walk through some of the basic things that you're going to engage in this conversation. And then we, as Threaded, we actually then have small groups in which people go where it's not just one night, but they actually do like 10 weeks where they're together with a diverse group, the same group, and they're having conversations that are centered really around a biblical theme and gospel point, but allow for people to have conversation around the race issue in ways that are robust, but they're also biblical as well. So we've got these different ways. If you start with the Dallas Dinner Table situation, and be in that unity space, that you can go further. You can keep making the point, even moving to the point where you go even beyond the groups into actual community action. And so that's where we are. All of this is moving us to really looking at the systemic issues in our community and trying to make things right based on that. So Dion, I'm glad that you guys are doing it. It's great to be in partnership. Dallas Dinner Table, for those of you who are listening on the podcast who hear it, when is the last time that they can sign
up? We got to give them
it?
that, DallasDinnerTable.com, for the people that's listening. I know we got the banner up for the video, but the call to action for the listeners, do it now. Well, pull over first, but do it now. Go to DallasDinnerTable.com, and there's a place to register. It's virtual, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's virtual. So if you're worried about COVID, that's been taken care of, and so we can.
They took care of COVID.
They took care of COVID.
Wow, that's amazing. I got to be a part of this now.
But it's an easy way for you to still have this, jump into this and do it safely. So all those things are your seat has been prepared for you, is what we're saying. All you got to do is claim it.
That's
so just DallasDinnerTable.com. Go check it out. January the 17th.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, Dion, but you have to sign up by what date?
Yes. So our goal, we typically close registration 1 week before.
Okay.
So I think we may be able to hold off until Wednesday.
Was that the 13th?
Yes. So, but still, register now. Just what you said, Antoine. Yes.
Do it
now. Pull over, register now. Do that. Make sure you get a seat. Yeah, and join us.
No, that's perfect. DallasDinnerTable.com, DallasDinnerTable.com. Register now. You have until January 10th and maybe 13th. We talked about, the people of color at the beginning of this podcast, that they like to just do things
we
a little
talk
late.
About hours, not days.
Just,
we try to do it. Ain't no wedding starting 3 days late.
That's right. And if you are part of Dallas Dinner Table, DallasDinnerTable.com, if you come, we are also, Color Commentary is going to be doing a pre-show around lunchtime to kind of help people know what to expect. You'll be like, I don't really know what to expect. And we're going to kind of talk about it with Dion. And maybe Dion can bring in some folks who maybe facilitated before, and we can talk about that. And then after the Dallas Dinner Table, we're going to do a little Dallas Dinner Table dessert, which is kind of an after party. We usually call it an after party, but we're going to be there. Dion will be with us there as well. Talk about what just happened, hear from some folks who've been through it, and what their experiences were like. A great place to kind of debrief. So hopefully you guys can get engaged with that. Go to DallasDinnerTable.com and register now. Dion, so glad you're here. I know you got to leave in a little bit, Dion, but hang with us if you want. Or it's up to you. We gonna dive into some MLK.
I would love to be here for this dive, but I have a question about this dessert. Are we going to? I think we need to is that going to be? I'm bringing a dessert. Give me the idea.
Look, I got desserts at the house. That's what I do.
that ain't a problem.
So it ain't no problem. We do dessert right now.
Right. I got middle of the day. This is my dessert day.
Always has dessert. Okay.
I'm ready. I'm the salt, not the. I'm the sweet,
not the salt.
Okay. Yeah. So we don't mess around with that other stuff. Yeah.
All right.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm gonna get ready. I'm gonna get ready since you are already ready. I'll get ready.
Yes. Yeah. I got to pick mine out. It's gonna be ice cream associated with it for sure, because I don't do nothing without the ice cream. So we're gonna get the dessert in there. Well, maybe I'll bring in a swirl so we can make it culturally diverse. I'll get Neapolitan. I'm gonna bring my Neapolitan ice cream. I got it all. Man,
so it's too on the nose, Mark. You can't bring the Neapolitan. It's too on the nose.
Correctly. You pronounced it correctly, so it's all good.
That's right. It's
not Napoleon. It's not Napoleon.
Not the Napoleon. No, we ain't bringing that. Too much history.
Not Napoleon.
Well, Dion,
I'm gonna jump out of here.
All right, we'll see you later. Thank you very much.
All right, see you later.
Thanks, y'all.
Again, you guys check that out, DallasDinnerTable.com. Now let's get back to it, because I know we had some questions in the chat there. I saw Paula had hers. She said, well, maybe not a question, maybe a comment that we can kind of work off of. So I've been told that Martin Luther King was a socialist, and I wasn't sure what to believe. So this conversation is very interesting. I think the question I would have, if Paula's still on there, maybe for anybody if they're just learning this, like what does that do to you if Dr. King was a socialist? How does that change or affirm certain things about him? I'd like to just kind of hear what people think.
That is an excellent question.
Well, thank you. I don't usually ask.
I love it because it's like, so Dr. King fought for civil rights, and we're in unless he thinks this. In that case, we no longer like civil rights. Like, what are the implications of the statement? Paul, I posted a link earlier, by the way, and I'm gonna post it one more time because I'm not sure if you can go back and see it. But it's a link from the Stanford University, where it's the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute, and they have an article, a relatively small write-up about Dr. King's history with communism and socialism. And so that might be helpful for that conversation that you have with someone who might offer that opinion about Dr. King and give you something to look at and a launch pad to go and do some further research if you want.
Yeah.
But back to your question.
Well, and I'm seeing the response, and I appreciate it, Paula. She says makes me want to look at socialism again to see if I think it has any merit. And may I say, like, that is a rare response, I think, when I hear it, that people would say, well, let me look at it a little bit closer. But I think maybe that's part of why Dr. King is being sort of canceled, potentially. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think because
he could push.
Yeah, he can kind of push people to think in certain ways that could have, and I'm putting this in quotes, that could have disastrous effects on America, because it would go against capitalism. Now, here's what I say to that: America has been practicing socialist legislation since the inception. So it's not necessarily that if you practice, and I'm not even saying I'm a fan of socialism, I'm just marking the truth, is that there have been socialist legislation that has been done throughout American history, that has created, I think, the room for capitalism to even expand in such a way. I mean, if you think about the GI Bill coming right out of World War II, which allowed for a lot of these folks who are coming back who'd been at war, and they didn't have jobs, and they needed money to go to school and to buy houses. The suburbs that I live in, and probably most of the suburbs that anybody's here listening, were really built by the GI Bill, engaging that. We only went to 2% African Americans in that way. The New Deal, right? These kinds of things in the midst of the Depression, right? Social Security, even in itself, is one. Medicaid. I mean, these are lots of different ways in which these kinds of, how do we think about creating ways for the community to repair itself, or be repaired from things that were unforeseen. I mean, look, many of us are getting free vaccines, right? That's a kind of socialist, like, we're all in this together. All the money that people got sent.
That's why people don't want it.
That's part of it. I mean,
part of why so many are rejecting it.
Yeah, but I mean, even the checks that were sent by both parties, right? Both Trump and Biden both sent checks to the American people to try to help them in this time of need. Those are kinds of socialist things. Yeah. So,
well, real quick, I think there's a few things about what you said that I want to.
You want to clean up?
I just want to make sure that we're clear
that people are hearing it correctly.
Well, number one is, we're not saying that Dr. King was a communist.
Well, we said socialist,
right? Or Marxist, right? And that's part of the problem. That was number one. Number one is Dr. King is clear from 1952 all the way up through 1962 or 3, closer to the end of his time, about his denunciation of communism. And so the idea is flat on its face. The second problem is the intertwining, the synonymous use of words of, or what am I trying to say? The interchangeability of the words of socialism, communism, and Marxism. Marxism is an ideology. Communism is a way of governing. Socialism is a way of dealing with revenue and resources and wealth, economics. And so we have to be careful about the interchange, because a lot of time the conversation will easily slip from socialism to communism to Marxism, right? When I would say that Dr. King was sympathetic to the description of the problem that is in socialism, I would say that he outright disagree and denounces communism and Marxism's ultimate goal of replacing the influence of the church on society, and saw it as a chief foe against Christianity. So Dr. King he's anti-Marxist, he's anti-communist, right? And the ideology and the governing, but the socialism piece of it, the aspect that deals with the money, he's looking at it and he's saying, well, he can see there were some things work and some things doesn't. And to your point, Marcus, America would have to reckon with the same critical evaluation if you're going to measure Dr. King by his sympathy with aspects of socialism and call him a Marxist as a result of that, then you'd have to say the same thing about America as an entire country who has sympathized with certain aspects of socialism, not just on the problem side, but on the solution side, that has realized itself in the ways that you just mentioned, Marcus. If we're gonna be consistent in the way that we judge these things, then not only is Dr. King a Marxist, if you're going to do that, but America is a Marxist. And of course, nobody's going to
That's
say
if you're
America's
interchanging all of the terminology.
that's if you're interchanging the terminology, or even if you're going to say socialism, you say, hey, well, Martin Luther King wanted socialism because he was sympathetic to an aspect of socialism. But then you would have to say that America is a socialist country because it's sympathetic to an aspect of socialism, especially where it pertains to insurance, roads, schools, police officers, GI bills, so forth, blah 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 blah. Right. And whether you like that or don't like that is kind of not my point, and I don't even think that's your point, Marcus, about making a stand as to which one is right or wrong.
Right.
It's about the consistency with which we declare someone completely on the left or completely on the out or completely on the in. And the same courtesy extended to the development of the American country and our economic system, and even some of our governance. That same courtesy can be extended to people who are wrestling with these ideas and trying to figure out how to maximize the situation we're in with its blended kind of capitalism / socialist mix.
Yeah, and look,
I may have made it worse.
No. I think what you did is you opened up the conversation in the midst of we're talking about the journey, right? What we have to remember is that people are simplistic, but they're complicated at the same time. They can't be sort of dropped into a single barrel and fit nicely. So I'm wearing, for those who can't see me, I'm wearing a Steelers jersey right now, and it's just kind of sort of fortuitous because the Steelers back in the 1990s had on their roster what we would call the ultimate slash player. His name was Cordell Stewart. They called him Slash because they'd be like, what position do you play? Well, I play quarterback, I play receiver, I play running back, and a little defensive back and punt returning. Right, like he did all those. Now the NFL hated that, like because they want you to be like, no, you're a quarterback, or no, you're a receiver. That's what they want. But what they found with Cordell is like he had the ability to kind of do all these things enough that you would put him in either as a starter or at least second string. And I think that's the same thing with sort of humanity. Like we want to kind of go, these labels that we put on one another. Say Dr. King is a socialist, and that defines him completely, because he liked a certain socialist idea. And it's like, well, he's kind of got some socialist things that he thinks and enjoys, but he also likes democracy. I mean, just, like he fought quite a bit.
Or aspects of capitalism.
Aspects of capitalism, right?
Socialism versus capitalism.
Sorry, to put those two in the same category of economic, systems. He obviously, liked socialism and had aspects of capitalism, because in some capitalism is what allow for aspects of even democracy to exist, right? So I think we're more slash than we think, and I think we should allow people to have that. And that's what makes it so difficult right now in our conversation, as far as the journey is concerned, is that when you say you're this, then that's what you are, and either you have to stay there, like if you call that, you have to stay there, or that there's new nuance that maybe you're like that sometimes, but other times you're not like that. And I think in our Christian journey, I've seen it in my own life. As being a Christian, there's been times where I was, staunchly sort of a Protestant Baptist in my thoughts and my ideology, but there's ways in which I've allowed, aspects of Catholicism to invade the way in which I understand how to do life and think about Christ, right? And allow different aspects inside of that denominations to do that, different hermeneutical styles, right? Like, so I think that people are just more complex. And I think so as we look at people, and Dr. King is who we're kind of putting on that spot right now, that we'll see this journey has lots of levels. And I'd be curious, I'd be curious to see where Dr. King would have ended up if he were still alive. You know what I mean?
Well, Marcus, we know the answer, and
dead
the
later.
reason, how we know, right? How we know the answer, because he's not here, and somebody took him out.
Yeah,
they took him out because they saw him as a threat to America.
Yeah,
Not
and
and the American way of being, and the American way of being was democracy, capitalism, Christian, which the opposite of all those things.
yeah,
We could say white in there, but I'm gonna try to stay. But and Dr. King, wasn't 100% in on everything, on all of that. He saw capitalism as a great potential, but also saw it as a tool that could be used that have devastating consequences to millions of people. And depending on how it's used, it could work right or work wrong. And there were people who were like, nope, capitalism's great. And if you don't like it, if you don't like any of it, then you don't like none of it,
Yeah.
And so forth and so on. And it didn't matter. For 10 years, Dr. King would do just like I've had to do in a couple of years, for the couple of years I've been doing this, say the same thing over and over again. Antoine, you're this. No, I'm not that. This. Well, but you said this. Yes, I think that about that.
Yeah.
But I don't buy the whole alphabet.
Right.
I like point A and B.
Yeah.
And I can extract that without needing that whole suite of ideas. Nope. That's too big a pill for us to bear. And we've got to get better at doing that if we're going to learn how to work together and move forward. I always say this is Martin Luther King, like you said it multiple times, Marcus. We're using Martin Luther King as an example for how to deal with people who are on a journey. This show is really about, like you've said many times, being on a journey and having grace for people and ourselves, to learn and to grow in our thoughts over time, and to not throw out really good ideas because those ideas wasn't present when we first started our conversation, but that we grew into them. And unfortunately, we live in a time where it's all too easy to just discount and dismiss and disqualify people for step one of their journey, and the thoughts that came out of it, as opposed to listening to where they are now and understanding what they're trying to understand, what they're doing, we're in their current space of growth.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to kind of get us to the end here. There's so many things you said in that last monologue that I was like, oh, that is a whole nother podcast, what he just said there, in good aspects. The systemic, well, I'm not going to get to it. I think the challenge then for us as we kind of make our way out is that for each one of us to start to first think about our own sort of variety and diversity from an identity standpoint, and recognize that there are lots of ways in which we engage the earth. You know what I mean? Whether it's a Christian, a father, a mother, a wife, a daughter, someone who thinks of, whatever those things are for people, and recognize that they can exist inside the same body. So that's a challenge. But the challenge too is that as we hear people say things, that we really stop and go and maybe ask more questions. That we don't let our fear of what they said throw us out of relationship with them. But let maybe that sort of churning that happens when somebody says something that you don't particularly like, they allow that to actually draw you into deeper conversation and deeper engagement. Because the more we engage with one another, the easier it will be for us to move forward in our country amidst this problem of race and racial division. And I believe that the gospel desires it for the people of God to do that, and that Jesus can be the place that we move in deeper into, that will allow us to understand more about who we all are together. And so that's why we, as Thread and as Color Commentary, we center the gospel in the midst of this. We think that is a great unifying agent for the conversation. And so we're glad that you guys are here for our Color Commentary Live. Make sure, if you have not, on the places that you are, either follow us on Facebook or subscribe to the YouTube site, and check us out at wearethreaded.org to find out about the things that are coming up. We told you about Dallas Dinner Table. That's coming up, dallasdinnertable.com, which is coming up. Sign up by the 10th. We have you'll see on the Facebook, there's a friend of ours doing a worship revival that's happening towards the end of the month of January 28th. Come in the Dallas area. We've got small groups and classes starting. Be a part and find your crew that's coming in that wants to learn together, and allow us to come alongside you as you try to grow stronger in this engagement around race and what the Bible has to say about it. So glad that you guys were all here. Thank you, Paula, and for your question, and Brian, and all the folks who have been in here, in and out. We're thankful for that. We thank Dion, Antoine, as always. Thank you for being here as well. I'm Marcus Lloyd, and you know that this, as we deal with covered commentary, is a place where we want to bring you lots of different ideas and lenses that are coming out of different perspectives. And so as you come to us, we want you to look through those lenses and make sure that you stay colored.